The 3 things that you need to be doing with your drums 100% of the time, most of the time. Let's get into it. All right, so right here I have a song put together in a couple hours, mixed it, gave it the whole 9. There's a lot going on in this track right here. It's only like 35 seconds long. Let's hear it. It has a lot of interesting drum elements. It's got a funny time signature. The first thing that you need to be doing with your drums is compression. Compression is the heart and soul of most drums. I have yet to find anybody that has good sounding drums without compressing them somehow, either on the way in or on the way out. At the end of the day, compression is going to be one of the most important things that you're doing for mixes in general, especially your drums, electronic or otherwise. So let's hear the drums on their own with all the processing that I've given them up to this point. Okay, so it's organic, it's not too hyper-produced. It's not all up in your ass with samples and explosions. There's nothing wrong with that, but for this, I really wanted to keep it as organic as possible. I obviously used a sample library. I use Get Good Drums. This specifically, I believe, is the latest one, which is the Matt Halpern Periphery 5, engineered by Nolly Get Good, who is an idol of mine in the production and engineering world and modern metal, as well as played by Matt Halpern, who's a phenomenal drummer and obviously inspires a lot of the Get Good Drums drum libraries. So they sound amazing as is, but I have done some processing. I have compression going on all over this kit, specifically the smash and grab compressor from GGD. So the reason why I like this so much is because of the way that it's tuned to all different types of drums. And you can tell it exactly what you're doing, and it's gonna help you set your attack and release times. Disclaimer. If you don't know what's going on with compression, or that's a foreign term to you, you have to find a way to figure out what compression is before you dive headfirst. I watched hundreds of videos about compression and people better than me explaining how compression works before I understood it enough to use it. If you want me to be the person that teaches you how, then you can comment. But I'm not gonna make that video unless people want it, because that's a hell of a video. So I dial in a lot of what's going on in these compressors. I have one on my kick. I have one on my snare. I have one on my toms. I have one on my overheads. I have one on my parallel compression bus. I have one on my kit bus and my rooms bus. So there's a lot of compression going on. So let's kind of look at this in a nutshell and turn off all the compression for the entire kit and play everything through with the same volumes, provided you gain match properly when you're compressing. And let's hear how it sounds without the compression. So obviously with compression, you're gonna lose a bit of volume unless you perfectly gain match. And to be honest with you, I definitely did not perfectly gain match all of my compression for this track. What you saw at the end there was me boosting the volumes of the rooms and the kit itself to get it up to audible with the rest of the track, while still showing that there's not much compression, there's not a lot of impact happening, which you can hear obviously when all the instruments are hitting as hard as they are, the drums just are not cutting through. And a lot of that can probably be avoided with enough distortions and with enough EQ, but without compression, you're just not coming up to it. And the drums on their own without compression. And with compression. So obviously there's a big volume difference, and if you were gain matching properly, which I obviously wasn't, the audible volume or perceived volume is going to be higher with compression because all of the hits are getting compressed and they're getting boxed in and they're becoming consistent. So your kicks and your snares are going to be a little bit more pronounced. All right, let's talk about the second thing that you need to be doing to your drums on every single mix if you want it to sound the way that you want it to sound. Most likely, you're gonna wanna saturate your drums a little bit. Saturation is kind of adding a little bit of that fuzz and that hair, a little bit of distortion or teeth to your sounds that are gonna get them to lock together a little bit more. And a lot of the times, whether people like it or not, it seems like adding saturation to things can get things to poke through the mix a little bit more than a lot of the heavy EQ and compression that you might see. If you're compressing and you're not quite getting what you want from your mix, you might need to add a little bit of saturation to some elements to get it to kind of bite through the center. For example, this is a pretty heavy, aggressive track. There's a lot of crazy guitars. I have 3 guitars stacked on top. I have a main line, and then I have a second one on top of that. And then I have a thickener track on top of that, which is playing an absurdly low note. And that's all before the bass guitar even comes in. That distortion and a lot of that attack and release that's happening with the guitars will eat up a lot of the mix for the drums, especially your higher end. So saturation might be just what you need. And we're gonna talk about a couple different ways of how to saturate something. So specifically, I make a crush track, which I send some of my main kit bus, which sounds like this, and my room tracks, which sound like this on their own. I send both of those in only a small quantity to this crush track, which is a saturator track. You can saturate a couple different types of ways. So one of my favorite ways to do it, and a good trick, and a big part of the reason why I wanted to make this video, is this 1176. So there's a lot of companies like Arturia and such that make 1176 copies, but only a couple of them, from what I've seen, can do these tricks. With the 1176 hardware from Universal Audio, it's a compressor, first of all. It's one of the fastest compressors that you can get as far as the attack and release times go. You can do something called all button mode, which is where you can press all of your ratios at the same time and kind of collapse them in, which is going to give you a really aggressive and unstable compression that doesn't really play with the attack and release knobs. My favorite thing that you can do with one of these, though, is you can turn the attack knob to the off position, which basically disengages all of the compression elements and turns this thing into just a tube powerhouse that you can send audio through. When you send audio through the 1176, it will distort going through it instead of compress it, because typically hardware compressors can add distortion if they're overdriven. Let's hear that on its own without any of that tube distortion and see how the drums sound. And now let's turn off the compression and start to drive it and see how nasty we can get it to sound. Pretty grimy. So you can use this as a crush track all on its own by blending in your crush track with the rest of your buses for your drums. It'll give it a little bit more of a powerful, hairy sound that's going to peak it just into the mix enough to give you audible quality. I'm going to play the whole mix with the crush track on 0 and slowly bring it in and see if we can kind of hear what it's doing to our mix. Let's see if we can A-B that. So I'll mute the crush track and bring it back in intermittently to hear what it's doing. I love it. It sounds great. It gives it a really trashy, nasty sound. And as you could probably guess too, that probably works really well with like punk music or punk rock music, having a really trashy, bus sound would give you all the hair that you would need to have all that attitude. And now you might see that I have two other plugins on this bus that are off right now. Let's turn off the 1176 and go into the next type of saturation or method of saturation that I would use to get my drums to kind of poke through the mix. This is going to be the stock option for Studio One. So this is called Red Light Distortion. The Red Light Distortion plugin I have a love-hate relationship with. I used to use it. It was like the first plugin I ever used on Studio One. I just put it on all my DI guitar tracks and thought that that was like a guitar pedal. And it was not. If I still had any of those tracks, I'd play them so we could all laugh at me. But for now, we'll just start to use this for our crush bus. So let's hear it on its own with the mix all the way down, which means that you're hearing none of the plugin effect and only the raw sound. And we'll slowly bring the mix in so we can hear what it's doing to sound. So that's obviously adding a lot of hair and a lot of aggression to the sound. You definitely wouldn't want to be using that as your only drum tone, but when you can blend it in with the rest of the raw drum tracks, it'll give you that power that you need. So let's try to do this, blend it up from 0 with the entire mix on. It sounds super gnarly. A little bit of tweaking I was doing was to change the distortion versus the drive. Too much drive with too little distortion kind of was just pushing the snare. A little bit more distortion, I could hear way more of the cymbals, so I like the way that sounds. And the third way to saturate your drums is a good old saturator. So one of my favorite saturators on the market is going to be the FabFilter Saturn. The Saturn is a crazy gnarly plugin. It's super easy to use. It might be one of the, other than the Pro Q, it might be one of the only plugins from FabFilter that I'll die on a hill on. The Pro Q EQ from FabFilter is fantastic, but this saturator, I put it all over the place. So basically what you do is you pick which type of tube or saturation or amp sound that you want, and then you blend up the drive, and it applies it to the entire EQ spectrum or sound spectrum of the drums, or whatever you're putting it on. So let's hear it on its own with no drive on our crush bus. Even with no drive, it's still doing something. We'll turn the mix all the way down so then you're not hearing the plugin. Already with the drive at 0 and the mix all the way up, you're already hearing it. Let's blend in like a healthy amount of nasty saturation, and then we'll blend it in with the drums. A little much. That's a pretty nasty sound. So we'll zero out the crush bus, and then we will go back and listen and blend it into the full mix. It sounds super natural, but just smashed enough to be in the mix and not have it seem like there's a lot of artificial distortion happening. It just gives it so much more power. Let me know which sound of saturation you liked the most. If it was the overdriven 1176, the red light stock distortion from Studio One, or the FabFilter Saturn, I definitely want to hear that. So the third thing that you need to be doing to your drums if you want them to sound like the drums that you have in your head on your track, and we even loaded up a new track to explain this, is to absolutely under no circumstances for any reason be mixing your drums in solo separate from the kit without hearing the entire kit in mind. It's not a plugin, it's not a magic item to put on your track, it's not an automated hold the track, hit Q to quantize kind of thing. It's gonna be all in your ears. You're gonna be making the drums its own instrument from within the song so that it actually sounds like an entire kit. And the thing of it is even if you weren't using samples and you weren't using a sample library, if you were trying to mix an actual kit where all of the mics on the kit were separate, which they are, you have your overheads and your spot mics and your cymbal mics and your distance mics and your sauce mics that you hide in the staircase. So then you get a lot of juicy reverb. If you mix them all like they're separate pieces of the kit and like they have nothing to do with each other, it's gonna sound trash. You gotta mix everything together. So we're gonna take a look at that now. So let's listen to this track. All right, so let's talk about what we did to this drum set. So we employed all three of the things that we've talked about so far. We have compressed all of the tracks individually. Well, not all. We've compressed the ones that need it because I'm not going to go smashing all my cymbal mics. But we've compressed everything that needed it. We've bussed everything that we've needed to bus. We have the kit separate from the rooms. We have the rooms treated. We have a crush bus, which actually, let's talk about this crush bus really quick. My crush bus on this is way different than my crush bus for my metal track, just the track before this. Essentially what's happening with drums per song is it's all about what it needs. Am I smashing this drum set like I did the last one and hoping that it punches through the center of my mix? Absolutely not. My drums are going to be pretty much the loudest thing in this mix apart from that nasty bass and the cool synths. What I'm doing to gather that is going to be a bunch of tricks or lots of smart compression that's small moves across the entire board to get it to sound organic and to get it to sound real. And if you are punching your own drums in, it's all about how you make your drums too. You can't make them robotic or they're going to sound robotic. No amount of mixing is going to fix that. The crush bus, I contribute a lot of the sound of this track to the crush bus. Let's listen to the crush bus. So what I love about this crush bus specifically is this very subtle tape saturation that's happening, all with the balance is very well made. So I used a Pro Q3 to sweep out the low end so there's not too much woof happening. And if you listen, there's definitely enough woof happening. That kick drum sounds like somebody owes it money and it's coming to get it back. We have the saturator up next with just a warm tape and a little bit of that distortion. You're hearing it way heavy in the snare, that crack or that really just chill out snare. And my favorite part of the crush bus is the oxide tape, which we have on the 7.5 inches per second. It's how fast the actual tape is going through the double reels, which is giving it that kind of almost vintage sound quality to make it real tapey and snappy. And once you blend that in with your other buses and your reverbs, that's a pretty sweet sound. So we have the saturation, the compression, and I mix this without listening to the drums in solo. It's all about listening to the faders when you move them. If I solo the drums right now, I might tell you that my hats are a little bit too loud. Let's bring them down. But my overheads are taking up way too much of the sound quality. And my rooms are just flooding the spot mics and it's just not making it right. I want my kick louder. I need my snare way louder. It feels good. I got that kick in my chest. I like the way that it feels. It's super beefy. But then when I play it with the entire mix, it still sounds good. The core of the drums are there, but I'm missing a lot of my high end. I'm missing a lot of my cymbals. My crush bus just doesn't seem to be actually giving me any weight. I'm not moving with the song anymore. I just kind of hear the drums. Let's listen to that before I blindly move the faders, and then after I blindly move my faders around. It just doesn't hit the same. Those are the three things that you need to be doing to your drums if you want them to sound like the drums that are in your head when you're making your tracks. If you want it to move, groove, huge bass, punch right through the center of any mix, blast beats, swung beats, anything, you gotta compress it. You gotta consider saturation and distortion, reverbs, any effects that are on top, and you have to be mindful about what you're doing with your faders when you're deciding how the drums are gonna be sounding. If you like what you heard in this video between these two songs or any of the tips or anything that we talked about today, leave me a comment. Let me know some other stuff that you're curious about. Maybe I can help you out. Maybe we can make a video about it. Maybe we can make some demonstrations. I'm Josh with MoreDeadRecords, and I'll see you in the next video. Now, I love this groove so much, we have to lay down some kind of lead on it before we're done with this.